Hey, pal, neighbors are nervous. You can't just sit here watching houses.
Officer, I'm reading a book. I'm waiting for a client.
Look, don't get smart with me. Put the book down. Let's see hands.
I have a right to read in public. Am I detained?
Yeah, for loitering. Stand up. You're coming with me.
Touch me and it's a lawsuit. I'm a civil rights attorney.
Hey, pal, neighbors are nervous. You can't just sit here watching houses. Nolan Holloway's voice came hard and practiced the kind of command tone that didn't ask questions so much as lay down a boundary line and dare a person to cross it. Maurice Hall looked up from the open paperback in his hands, blinking once, as if he'd misheard the accusation. The immediate threat was obvious in the way Nolan closed the distance boots on concrete shoulders, squared ready hands. The claim was already on the record the moment it was spoken, and within days that claim would collapse. Maurice didn't jerk. He didn't flinch. He kept his spine straight on the bench and held the book like it was exactly what it looked like reading, nothing more. Officer Maurice said, voice controlled, "I'm reading a book. I'm waiting for a client." Nolan's head tilted a fraction as if the word client was an attitude. He stepped in closer anyway, crowding the personal space on purpose. "Look, don't get smart with me," Nolan snapped. "Put the book down. Let's see hands." Maurice's fingers tightened around the paperback's spine. A small thing, paper and ink, but the demand wasn't really about the book. It was about obedience. About getting Maurice to perform compliance on command. Maurice lifted both hands slightly without dropping the book palms open, careful and deliberate. "I have a right to read in public," he said. "Am I detained?" That question landed like a tripwire. Nolan didn't like questions. Questions implied choice, and Nolan had already decided the script. "Yeah," Nolan said, voice flat. "For loitering? Stand up? You're coming with me." Maurice stood slowly, not because he agreed, but because he understood the physics of it. If Nolan grabbed him while he was seated, Nolan could control the leverage. Standing put them eye to eye. Still, Maurice could feel the heat rising in his face, the tightness at the base of his throat. He swallowed it down because the stakes were always higher than pride. "Touch me, and it's a lawsuit," Maurice said. Then he gave Nolan the truth that should have ended it. "I'm a civil rights attorney." That was the moment it turned. Not because Nolan suddenly respected lawyers, but because Nolan suddenly realized there might be consequences that weren't just internal. The body-worn camera was visible in the way Nolan held his posture, centered, squared, aware of his own performance. Maurice saw it too, the implied lens between them, the silent witness that didn't take sides, but did keep time. "You can tell that story later," Nolan said. "Right now you're not free to leave." Maurice didn't raise his voice. He lowered it tight and precise. "Please state the reason, and I'm requesting a supervisor." Nolan's jaw flexed. "You're refusing a lawful order." "I'm not resisting," Maurice said. "I'm asking the reason." Behind them, the neighborhood wasn't empty. It was one of those places where people walked dogs and carried groceries and pretended not to see conflict until it came too close. A woman with a tote bag slowed. A man near the corner stopped mid-step, then pretended he was checking his phone, except he wasn't pretending very well. Nolan saw them. He saw the attention. It irritated him. "Move along," Nolan barked at the woman. She didn't move. Not yet. She looked at Maurice, then at Nolan, then back at Maurice like she was trying to decide what kind of risk she was looking at. Maurice took a slow breath through his nose. His mouth felt dry. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips. He hated that part, the involuntary body response that came from knowing how fast this could go wrong. Nolan's hand hovered near his belt, a gesture that wasn't a draw, but was definitely a reminder. "Empty your pockets," Nolan said. Maurice didn't. He shifted the book to one hand and kept the other open at chest-height, palms out. "I don't consent to a search," he said. "Am I under arrest?" Nolan's voice hardened. "You're about to be." That line, short, sharp, easy to caption, would travel later far beyond this sidewalk. It would come back in a different mouth, in a different room, and it would not feel like power anymore. Maurice's eyes flicked to the bystanders. He needed calm voices around him. He needed witnesses who could narrate the truth in real time. Ma'am Morris said to the woman with the tote, keeping his tone respectful, "Would you mind staying nearby, or just, please watch. I'm not resisting." The woman swallowed, then nodded once. "I'm watching," she said, clear and steady. "He's not resisting." A second phone appeared, raised chest high from the man on the corner. The red dot wasn't visible, but the posture was. Nolan noticed. He shifted his stance to block the angle. "Put that away," Nolan ordered. The man didn't argue. He just spoke like a narrator. "I'm recording," he said calmly. He asked why. "You didn't explain." Nolan's eyes flashed. "This isn't your business." "It is when you're doing this in public," the man said. Micro turn. Nolan stepped back half a pace to radio something, and that half pace mattered. It meant he couldn't quite control the whole frame anymore. Nolan touched the radio at his shoulder. "Dispatch. I've got a suspicious male watching houses. Refusing orders. I'm detaining." Maurice heard the words and felt the old anger surge. Suspicious male watching houses. A story built out of nothing yet heavy enough to justify cuffs. Maurice kept his voice even. Please request a supervisor. I'm asking again. Nolan ignored him. Stand with your feet apart, Nolan said. Hands behind your back. Maurice's shoulders tightened, not from defiance, but from calculation. Behind the anger, he was running scenarios. If he complied, Nolan might cuff him anyway. If he didn't, Nolan would say he resisted. The bystanders were his only buffer right now. He turned his head slightly toward the woman. Please just keep saying what you see, he murmured. I got you, she said louder now. He's calm. He's asking questions. Micro turned. Another figure approached an older man in a windbreaker dog leash in hand. He stopped close enough to be part of it. What's happening? The older man asked. Nolan didn't answer him. He pointed. Back up. The older man didn't back up. He's reading a book, he said, voice incredulous. You said watching houses. Nolan's face tightened. Selective proof rejection was the engine here. Nolan didn't want the simple explanation, because the simple explanation didn't let him win face. Maurice held the book up slightly, not as a weapon, but as an object that should have ended the suspicion immediately. This is what I'm doing, Maurice said. Reading. Nolan's eyes didn't go to the pages. They went to Maurice's hands. Put it down. Maurice did, slowly setting it on the bench, palms open again. The bystanders watched every inch of the movement. Now Maurice said, I'm requesting a supervisor. Am I free to leave? No, Nolan said. You're being detained. The sidewalk had become a small arena, people orbiting the conflict phones, rising voices steadying. SE05 had started a witness circle, not yelling, not mobbing, just holding the space with calm narration and cameras. Micro turn, Nolan reached for Maurice's arm. Maurice's body reacted before his mind could stop it. Shoulders braced, muscles tightening, but he kept his hands open and his voice low. I'm not resisting, Maurice said quickly. Do not put your hands on me without stating the reason. Nolan grabbed anyway, fingers closing on fabric at the upper arm, a forced repositioning. Maurice felt the humiliation like heat, felt his stomach drop. He knew what it looked like, a black man being manhandled for existing. That's it, Nolan said loud enough for everyone. You want to argue, you can argue in cuffs. The tote bag woman spoke again, steady as a metronome. He said he's not resisting. You grabbed him. The older man with the dog added, You didn't explain why you're doing this. Nolan's head snapped toward them. Back up or you'll be cited. The man with the phone didn't move. We're standing on the sidewalk, he said. We're not interfering. Maurice's mouth was dry again. His fingers tingled. He had been through hostile rooms before, depositions, hearings, cross-examinations, but the street had a different kind of danger. The power imbalance came with tools. Backstory. Insert. 1. BG for 100 words, triggered by humiliation. Maurice wasn't just a man with a book. He was the person neighbors called when a landlord tried to slide an illegal notice under a door, when a traffic stop turned into a search, when a school meeting became a threat. He had a routine coffee in a travel mug, a paperback to keep his mind quiet, and a legal pad folded in his messenger bag because he hated wasting time. He knew the names of local community organizers and the security guards who did their jobs with dignity. He also knew the kind that didn't, and he knew what cameras did to lies. Nolan tightened his grip. Hands behind your back. Maurice didn't yank away. He did the one thing he could do, safely keep speaking in plain rights-aware language. I'm not resisting, Maurice said. Please state the reason. I'm requesting a supervisor. Nolan leaned in close voice, low now, private intimidation inside public theater. You think that title makes you untouchable? Nolan murmured. Not here. Maurice's eyes stayed on Nolan's face. I think the law applies to both of us. Micro turn, Nolan pulled out his cuffs. The metal flashed briefly, small and final. The crowd's tone changed. The witness circle got tighter, not physically blocking, but closing the distance enough to make Nolan feel watched. The tote bag woman raised her phone higher. You're going to cuff him for reading. Nolan snapped he was casing houses. The older man shook his head. That's not true. Maurice felt a cold wash of fear. This was the point of no return. Cuffs out, hands on him, the line crossed in front of witnesses. If Nolan put him in cuffs, the story could become whatever Nolan wrote. Maurice's voice went quieter. Why not just let me leave? He asked, not pleading, forcing the logic into the open. If I'm just sitting here, the safest outcome is I leave. Unless you're keeping me here. Nolan stared, and for a second the calculation was visible. If he let Maurice walk away now, it would look like he had overreached. If he cuffed him, it could blow up. Nolan wanted the path that preserved his authority. Turn around, Nolan said. Maurice turned slowly, hands still open. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw clenched. He could taste metal in his mouth. Stop the man with the phone, said voice rising for the first time. He's complying. You're escalating. Nolan barked back up. Micro-turn, a second officer arrived from the left. Roman Beckett walking in fast eyes, scanning the scene, hand already near his own belt. He looked from Nolan's cuffs to Maurice's posture to the circle of phones. Roman's first words weren't to Maurice. They were to Nolan. What do you have? Nolan said it quick, like a summary designed to win immediate agreement. Suspicious male watching houses, refused orders, loitering. Roman's eyes flicked to the bench where the book lay open. That detail hung in the air, awkward and undeniable. Maurice didn't wait for Roman to decide the story. I'm waiting for a client, he said. I asked if I'm free to leave. I requested a supervisor. Roman's mouth tightened. You a lawyer? Maurice nodded once. Civil rights? Nolan cut in. He's being difficult. SF2 surfaced in the crowd. A younger woman in gym clothes whispered to the tote bag. Woman not malicious, just scared and misreading. Maybe he really was casing houses, she said. Cops don't do this for no reason. The tote bag woman didn't snap at her. She just answered like a teacher. He's reading, she said, and he asked why. That's a reason to explain, not grab. Micro-turn. Roman gestured subtly, palm down toward Nolan's cuffs. Slow down. Nolan ignored it. Hands behind your back, Nolan repeated louder, as if volume was legitimacy. Maurice exhaled, controlled. I'm not resisting, he said again. Please state the reason. Nolan moved to cuff him. Near loss arrived like a shadow. The cuffs clicked once on one wrist. Cold metal, sudden humiliation, the sound sharp enough to make the bystanders gasp. Maurice's heart thudded so hard he felt it in his throat. He pictured the next steps, the squad car, the ride, the holding cell, the paperwork, the risk. Stop, Roman said, stepping in. Nolan snapped his head. What? Roman pointed at the phones. We've got multiple recordings. He's calm. What's the actual basis besides neighbors nervous? Nolan's face flushed. Loitering. Roman looked around. He's in a public area. Nolan tried to push through it with momentum. He's watching houses. The older man with the dog spoke again louder now. I live here. I don't know you. I know him. He's been sitting with that book. That line I live here carried leverage. It reframed who belonged. Micro-turn, a building staff member, appeared from a nearby entrance keys clipped to their belt vest on. She moved briskly, eyes wide at the small crowd. What's going on? She asked. I got calls from residents. Nolan seized it like oxygen. This man's suspicious. The staff member looked at Maurice, then at the open book, then at Nolan's hand on the cuff. He's waiting for a client, she said, sounding unsure. I think one of our residents said they had an attorney coming. Maurice's shoulders loosened a fraction at the word attorney coming, but it was fragile relief. Name, Nolan demanded at her. She hesitated, fear of being wrong, fear of being involved. I don't know his name. Nolan turned back to Maurice, triumphant. See, nobody can verify you. DV1 was now fully lit refusal to verify obvious proof, insisting on the most suspicious interpretation. Maurice kept his tone calm, even as the cuff tightened on his wrist. You can verify me by calling for a supervisor, he said. Or you can let me leave. But you're choosing cuffs. Roman's eyes narrowed at that. He looked at Nolan. Did you ask dispatch to run his name? Nolan's jaw clenched. He wouldn't give it. Maurice replied immediately, You didn't ask. You demanded hands. The tote bag woman said he asked if he was detained. That's what he said. Micro-turn Roman lifted his own radio. Dispatch send a supervisor to our location. Nolan shot him a look. I've got it. Roman didn't blink. Not anymore. The witness circle held steady. No one screamed. No one rushed. They just stayed, phones, raised voices, narrating. Imperfection 1 entered a sudden burst of wind, and street noise muffled a few words as Roman spoke into the radio. A passerby later would say they thought Roman had said arrest when he had said supervisor. That misheard assumption would ripple for a minute, tightening the crowd's fear, making someone step closer than they should. Did he just say arrest the gym clothes woman? Whispered alarmed. No, the older man corrected firm. He said supervisor. Nolan saw the tiny confusion and tried to weaponize it. Back up, Nolan ordered the crowd again. You're interfering. The man with the phone answered evenly. We're not touching you. We're witnessing. Maurice's cuffed wrist throbbed. He kept his other hand, visible fingers spread. I'm not resisting, he said, the phrase now a life raft. Backstory, insert 2, BG 490 words. Maurice had learned to speak that way long before he became an attorney. He'd learned it in community rooms where mothers brought paperwork in plastic bags in late-night calls, where someone's voice shook because a stop had turned into a search. He'd learned that the body has to be calm, even when the mind is furious. His reputation wasn't built on speeches. It was built on showing up, on being steady, on reading the room and keeping people safe. A paperback was his way of staying human between crises. He had never expected that same paperback would become a pretext. Micro-turn headlights flashed another unit pulling up. A sergeant stepped out, older, measured, scanning. The sergeant's presence changed Nolan's posture immediately. Nolan straightened. Roman's shoulders relaxed slightly. The crowd leaned in without moving closer. Sergeant Roman called out, "We've got a detention based on watching houses." Multiple witnesses. One cuff applied. The sergeant's eyes went to Maurice's cuffed wrist. First, then to the book on the bench, then to the phones. Maurice spoke crisp. "Sergeant, I'm waiting for a client." "I was reading. I asked if I was detained. I requested a supervisor. I do not consent to a search. I'm not resisting." The tote bag woman added, "He's been calm the whole time." Nolan jumped in fast, trying to lock his narrative before it got questioned. Neighbors were nervous. He was sitting here watching homes. The sergeant didn't argue. He just asked the one question that mattered. "Who called it in?" he said. The building staff member raised her hand halfway. "Residents called me. I called because they were worried." The sergeant nodded once. "Worried about what exactly?" She swallowed. They said he didn't look like he belonged." Silence hit like a heavy blanket. Phones stayed steady. Everyone's eyes locked on the staff member and then almost involuntarily on Nolan. Freeze moment, nobody spoke for a full beat. No traffic sound felt louder than the quiet. Maurice's face didn't change much, but his eyes sharpened and Nolan's mouth tightened as if he'd been caught mid-sentence. The truth had landed in the open, and now the scene belonged to it. The sergeant turned to Nolan. "Remove the cuff." Nolan's head snapped up. "Sergeant, remove it," the sergeant repeated, still calm. "Now." Micro turns, Nolan hesitated 1 second too long, then unlocked the cuff with a sharp, annoyed motion. The metal released Maurice's wrist. A red mark remained undeniable. Maurice flexed his fingers, once blood-returning pain blooming. He kept his hands visible anyway. He didn't rub the mark. He wanted it seen. The sergeant addressed Maurice directly. "Sir, are you injured? Do you need medical aid?" Maurice's voice stayed steady. "My wrist hurts. I want the incident documented, and I want Nolan's name and badge number." Nolan's nostrils flared. "My name is Nolan Holloway." The sergeant looked to Roman. "Get their names as witnesses. Ask if they're willing to give statements." Institutional backbone began to form stepwise, not cinematic. Roles moved with purpose. Micro turn. Roman pulled a small notepad, approached the tote bag woman first. "Name?" Roman asked. "Carla," she said. "Carla Nguyen." Roman nodded. "What did you see?" Carla answered like a witness narrator, concise. "He was reading." Nolan said neighbors were nervous. He demanded hands. Maurice asked if he was detained. Nolan said yes for loitering. Nolan grabbed him and cuffed him. The older man with the dog stepped forward. "I'm Lionel," he said. "I live right there. I saw the whole thing." The gym clothes woman, chastened, spoke quietly. I thought the cops had a reason, but I heard the staff say it was because he didn't look like he belonged." The sergeant nodded at that, eyes hardening, not angry but focused. Maurice asked again, controlled. "Am I free to leave now?" "Yes," the sergeant said. "You are free to leave." Maurice didn't move yet. "I'm staying until I get confirmation this is being documented." The sergeant held eye contact. "It will be documented." Micro turn, the sergeant turned to the building staff member. "Do you have a log of the resident calls?" She nodded. "We have a front desk. Calls get written down." That was enough to anchor time and narrative without magic. The story had a paper trail. The sergeant turned to Nolan. "You're done here. Step back." Nolan's jaw clenched. "I was doing my job." The sergeant replied plainly, "You escalated without sufficient basis, in front of witnesses." Nolan looked at the phones like they were insults. Carla spoke, not triumphant, just clear. "We're going to provide this video if needed." Nolan snapped, "You can't." The sergeant cut him off. "Enough." Imperfection 2 arrived. One of the phones sputtered low battery warning, and the recording cut out for a moment, right as Nolan protested. The person holding it cursed softly, fumbling for a charger. It didn't erase what happened, but it did create a gap that made the sergeant rely even more on witness statements. "Damn it," the man with the phone muttered. "It died." Carla answered calm. "Mine didn't." Micro turn, a building operations manager arrived, badge on a lanyard, keys. A face that said he'd been pulled from a desk mid-task. "I'm the operations manager," he said, breath slightly fast. "What's going on out here?" The sergeant didn't let Nolan narrate first this time. A resident concern turned into a detention. "We have witnesses. We need your staff to preserve any notes of the call and any relevant footage from your entrances." The operations manager blinked. "Preserve." "Yes," the sergeant said. Do not delete anything. Maurice listened carefully. The word preserve mattered because it meant the institution was taking the event seriously as an event, not a complaint. The operations manager nodded, swallowing. Understood. Maurice finally allowed himself to exhale. His shoulders dropped a fraction, but the anger was still there, tight in his chest, because none of this should have happened in the first place. Nolan tried one last time to salvage face. He was loitering, Nolan insisted. He was sitting there. Maurice turned to Nolan slowly. So was everyone else, he said, gesturing slightly to the people standing with phones. But you didn't cuff them. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. He didn't need more. Officer Holloway, the sergeant said, you're going to ride back with me. Nolan's posture stiffened. Sergeant. Now the sergeant said, tone final. Micro turn, Nolan walked toward the sergeant's unit, shoulders, tight jaw-clenched eyes straight ahead, like a person trying not to look at the crowd. The witness circle didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just kept recording until Nolan was out of the immediate space because they understood the difference between a moment and an outcome. Maurice picked up his paperback from the bench. The pages had bent slightly where it had been dropped. He stared at the crease like it was a bruise. Carla stepped closer but kept respectful distance. Are you okay? She asked. Maurice nodded once. I will be. Lionel said, I'm sorry this happened. Maurice swallowed. His voice lowered. Me too. The operations manager cleared his throat. Sir, if you're here to meet someone, I can have them come down. Maurice looked at him. Yes, he said, and I want it noted I was here for a lawful purpose. The operations manager nodded quickly. Absolutely. A client finally appeared, nervous, confused, clutching paperwork. She looked between Maurice's red-marked wrist and the lingering officers. What happened? She asked. Maurice forced his voice calm for her sake. We'll talk inside, he said. You're safe. The next days weren't cinematic. They were administrative, procedural, relentless, exactly how accountability actually happens when it happens at all. Maurice didn't rely on one miracle clip. He relied on what always mattered: multiple records, consistent witness statements, and institutional roles doing what they were supposed to do once the spotlight turned on. He filed a formal complaint. He requested the body camera footage through ordinary channels. He asked the operations manager for confirmation that staff notes and any building footage were preserved. He took photographs of the cuff mark on his wrist, simple, mundane, credible. He wrote down names while his memory was hot: Carla Nguyen, Lionel, the gym-clothes woman whose doubt had turned into honesty. And because Maurice was who he said he was, he didn't do it alone. Microturn, a watch commander, called Maurice back within a day, not with apologies, but with seriousness. Mr. Hall, the watch commander, said on the phone, voice controlled, we received your complaint. A supervisor will meet with you. Maurice didn't soften. I want transparency, he said, and I want corrective action. The watch commander didn't promise outcomes. He promised process. We will review. That was backbone, but not enough yet. Microturn City Risk Management got involved the moment the facts looked expensive. A city risk manager sat in a conference room with a legal pad, not smiling, listening to the summary. What's your position? The risk manager asked. Maurice answered plainly. He detained me without sufficient reason, escalated in front of witnesses, and cuffed me because people felt I didn't belong. The risk manager's pen paused at that last phrase. And you have witnesses. Yes, Maurice said. Multiple. Microturn legal counsel entered, named Roll Not Magic. The city's legal counsel asked questions that weren't moral, just practical. Were you told you were free to leave? Counsel asked. No, Maurice said. I asked. He said I wasn't. Did you resist? Counsel asked. No, Maurice said. I said repeatedly I'm not resisting. Were you injured? Counsel asked. My wrist, Maurice said, and my dignity. Counsel didn't react to dignity, but the room did. A review moved forward in the only way it could, step by step. Microturn Roman Beckett was interviewed and had to choose between loyalty and truth. Roman's statement wasn't dramatic. It was careful. When I arrived, Mr. Hall was calm. A book was present. Multiple bystanders were recording. I requested a supervisor. The sergeant ordered the cuff removed. That wasn't betrayal. That was survival. Roman understood that lies inside reviews become anchors around a person's own career. Microturn Carla Nguyen gave her statement and repeated the same line that had held the scene together. He's not resisting. He asked why. You didn't explain. That sentence, word for word, became part of the institutional memory of the incident. And Nolan's viral quote, "You're about to be," came back later in the last third, not in a comment section, but across a table. In a recorded meeting, the sergeant looked at Nolan and asked, "Did you tell him you're about to be?" when he asked if he was under arrest. Nolan's eyes flicked down. "I don't recall." Carla's statement sat in the file. Lionel's statement sat in the file. Roman's statement sat in the file. Maurice's statement sat in the file. The phrase sat there too, like a weight. The sergeant repeated it anyway. Multiple witnesses recall you said, "You're about to be." Boomerang. The line had come home and it didn't sound like authority anymore. It sounded like a threat. Micro-turn Nolan was taken off street duty pending review. Not a headline, not a parade, just a schedule change that told the truth in quiet. Maurice's client work didn't stop. If anything, it got heavier. People heard because communities always hear. His phone rang with news stories. A mother whose son was searched outside a store. A tenant threatened with eviction. A man pulled over for a broken light that wasn't broken. Maurice kept reading his paperback between calls, but now he noticed the way he looked over his shoulder more often. He hated that too. Backstory insert 3 BG 490 words. Maurice's bond with the community wasn't abstract. He knew which corner store clerk slipped extra napkins into bags for kids who came in hungry. He knew which bus driver waited an extra 10 seconds when an elderly neighbor shuffled toward the stop. He knew the names of security guards who de-escalated with dignity instead of humiliation. He believed in ordinary solidarity people staying witnessing, speaking calmly, refusing to let a lie become the official version. That was why the moment on the sidewalk mattered. The witness circle wasn't about drama, it was about truth surviving. Micro-turn negotiations began because institutions rarely volunteer accountability without pressure. The city risk manager and legal counsel met Maurice's legal team in a plain room with plain chairs. "We're looking to resolve this," the risk manager said. Maurice didn't posture, "Then resolve it correctly," he said. The resolution couldn't just be money. Money without change was just rent paid to keep doing harm. Maurice's team demanded more an independent monitor for a period transparency reporting and a requirement that complaint intake be improved so people didn't get lost in paperwork. The city pushed back at first, not on the harm, but on the cost of oversight. Maurice pushed back harder, not with speeches, but with the simplest truth. "You cuffed a man for reading because he didn't look like he belonged," Maurice said. "And you had witnesses." Silence again, smaller but still sharp. Micro-turn, the operations manager from the building, provided a written confirmation that staff notes were preserved. It wasn't dramatic. It was boring. It mattered anyway. Micro-turn, a second supervisor inside the department, an internal split wanted to keep it quiet. Handle it internally, that supervisor argued in a meeting. But leadership, faced with a record that wouldn't bend, chose the only sustainable route: correct it. In the last meetings, the watch commander sat in and spoke plainly to Maurice. "We failed you," the watch commander said. "You should not have been detained based on that." Maurice held the commander's gaze. He didn't smile. He didn't accept it as closure. He accepted it as an admission, which was rarer than people like to believe. And Officer Holloway, Maurice asked. The watch commander didn't promise a spectacle. "There will be discipline," he said, "and we will document corrective action." Maurice nodded once. Good. The settlement path wasn't a victory lap. It was a ledger harm acknowledged future risk, reduced procedures adjusted because someone had refused to disappear. An independent monitor was assigned for a period. Transparency reporting was agreed to. The city committed to publish summary data about similar complaints enough to make patterns visible without exposing private identities. Maurice's legal counsel ensured the language was plain, enforceable in practice, not just pretty. And because Maurice insisted on dignity, the city issued a written apology. Not one that tried to justify. One that admitted the core wrong: he had been singled out and detained without a sufficient reason, and it should not have happened. The day Maurice received that apology, he sat at his kitchen table with the same paperback. He looked at the page he'd been on when Nolan approached. He realized he couldn't remember the sentence he'd been reading. The mind doesn't store words when it's busy storing danger. He read it again from the top. Then he closed the book, placed it gently on the table, and finally rubbed his wrist where the red mark had faded to a faint line. Outside, the world kept moving. But somewhere inside the city, in meeting rooms and briefing notes and training conversations that wouldn't be televised, that line, "Neighbors are nervous," had lost its power to justify a cuff. And that was the payoff, not a miracle, not a movie ending, but the slow-earned shift of an institution forced to see what a witness circle had made impossible to ignore. What happened to Maurice Hall started with a familiar pattern: a vague accusation, an order to comply, and a fast escalation when a person asked a reasonable question. First, if you're confronted by authority in public, keep your hands visible, use a steady voice, and ask simple clarity questions like whether you are free to leave and what the reason is. Next, if you feel safe doing so, request a supervisor early and repeat that request calmly, because escalation often slows when oversight is on the way. Then, if witnesses are present, ask them to stay and narrate what they see in plain language, since calm third-party observations can prevent a false story from taking over. After that, document injuries and key details as soon as possible while memory is fresh, including names of witnesses and any visible marks. Finally, follow up through formal complaint channels and keep communications factual and consistent because institutions respond most reliably to clear records and corroboration. Some elements are selectively fictionalized for education,